The marble floors beneath Olivia Blackwood's designer heels seemed to shatter the silence as she stormed into her Seattle penthouse nursery at midnight. Her breath caught, her throat seized. There, bathed in the amber glow of the nightlight, sat a complete stranger, broad shoulders hunched forward, weathered hands impossibly gentle as he cradled her baby daughter, Madison. The warm bottle touched Madison's lips with practiced precision. 7 months of crying, 7 months of sleepless nights, 7 months of nannies who couldn't calm her child. And this man, this unknown man, had somehow made her daughter peaceful in a way Olivia had never witnessed. Madison's tiny fingers curled around his calloused thumb like she'd found home. His deep voice whispered a lullaby that seemed to heal something broken in the air itself. When he looked up and met Olivia's wide, terrified eyes, he didn't flinch, didn't scramble to explain. He simply said 5 words that would change everything. She needed someone who understood. "Who are you?" The words scraped from Olivia's throat like broken glass, each syllable sharp enough to cut through the gentle atmosphere. Her designer purse slipped from trembling fingers, hitting the Persian rug with a muted thud. The stranger, tall, maybe mid-30s, wearing a simple gray sweater that had seen better days, shifted Madison carefully in his arms. His movements held the kind of confidence that came from experience, not training. "Cameron," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off the baby. "Cameron Reed. The agency sent me tonight." Olivia's mind raced through her contacts, her assistants, her carefully maintained schedule. No agency, no late-night arrangements, no authorization for anyone to enter her home, let alone touch her daughter. "I didn't call any agency," she said, her voice climbing with each word. Cameron's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your housekeeper called them. She said you'd been up 3 nights straight and the baby wouldn't stop crying." He paused, glancing down at Madison's peaceful face. "She was genuinely worried about both of you." Margaret had worked for her family for years, knew her absolute rules about Madison's care. "I specifically said no one touches her," Olivia snapped, stepping closer. "No one holds her except me." Cameron's expression didn't change, but his voice carried something raw. "She was crying so hard she could barely breathe when I got here. I wasn't going to stand in the hallway and listen to that." Something in his tone made Olivia pause. This wasn't the polished deference she was used to from staff. His eyes held exhaustion that mirrored her own, but beneath that lay old pain. Madison stirred slightly, making a soft sound of contentment that Olivia had heard maybe twice in months. "She wouldn't eat for me earlier tonight," she found herself admitting. "That's because you were nervous," Cameron said softly. "Babies can feel everything. Mom, I have in. Your stress, your fear, your exhaustion. Sometimes they just need to know someone's calm enough to keep them safe." The words hit deeper than expected. Safe? When was the last time she'd felt that way herself? "What makes you think you know what she needs?" Cameron was quiet for a long moment, his thumb gently stroking Madison's cheek. "Because I've been exactly where you are right now, alone in the middle of the night with no one to help. Just a baby who wouldn't stop crying and the knowledge that if I failed him, my heart would shatter completely." The admission hung between them like a confession. For the first time in months, Olivia forgot about her title, her wealth, her carefully constructed life. All she saw was someone who knew what it meant when everything depended on getting it right. The silence that followed felt charged with understanding and recognition. Cameron continued rocking Madison with slow, practiced movements that seemed to come from muscle memory. "You can put her down now," Olivia said finally, her voice steadier but still weary. Cameron shook his head. "Not yet. If I lay her down too soon, she'll startle awake and cry again. She needs to feel secure first." The specificity of his knowledge caught her off guard. This wasn't generic advice. This was hard-won wisdom from someone who had clearly spent countless nights learning to read infant cues. "You talk like you've done this 1,000 times, she said, crossing her arms. Cameron glanced down at Madison, his expression softening. "Once was enough to change everything about who I thought I was." Before she could press for details, Madison let out a tiny sigh and settled deeper against Cameron's chest. Something twisted painfully in Olivia's stomach. She'd hired the best nannies money could buy. Yet here was this stranger holding her child like he'd been doing it for months. The contrast was both inspiring and deeply humbling. What's your story? The question came out more abruptly than intended. Something about Cameron didn't fit the usual pattern of people who entered her carefully controlled orbit. Nothing worth telling, Cameron replied with a deflection that suggested exactly the opposite. Just a single dad trying to make ends meet. Lost my son's mother when he was 3 months old. Learned the hard way that there's no clocking out when you're the only one they've got. The simple words painted a picture that made Olivia's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had grown up surrounded by staff and support systems, by people whose job was to anticipate her needs. The idea of being truly alone with an infant was almost incomprehensible. "Why take this kind of work?" she asked. Cameron's lips twitched with what might have been a smile. "Because when you've been through nights where your child won't stop crying, and you're not sure you're strong enough to make it until morning, you want to help other people avoid that feeling, even if it's just for one night." The honesty caught Olivia completely off guard. "That's unusually noble," she said, her voice softer despite herself. Cameron shrugged with a gesture that was both humble and confident. "It's just human nature. At least it should be." For a moment, their eyes met across the dimly lit nursery, and Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Being truly seen by someone who expected nothing in return. The connection wasn't romantic exactly, but it was profound in a way that transcended their immediate circumstances. Cameron looked at her not as a wealthy executive, but as another parent struggling with impossible demands. The baby stirred again, and Cameron's response was immediate and instinctive, beginning to hum low and warm. Madison settled back into peaceful slumber, as if she had never been disturbed. "You're unusually good at this," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Most men I know panic when they see a bottle, let alone a crying baby." Cameron's eyebrow arched slightly, unusually. The single word carried just enough emphasis to suggest her surprise revealed assumptions she might want to examine more carefully. "I didn't have the luxury of panicking, sir," he said simply. "And maybe you shouldn't underestimate people based on what you expect them to be capable of." The gentle rebuke hit its target, and Olivia found herself momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed insistently from the dresser. 3 missed calls from the board chair. She turned it face down without answering. "You're ignoring someone important," Cameron observed. "You don't know anything about it," Olivia replied more defensively than intended. "I know when someone's trying to pretend a problem doesn't exist," he said quietly. "I've been there." The words settled over her like a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. How long had she been running from conversations about the company's financial problems, postponing decisions because none of the options seemed acceptable? "You think you have me figured out?" she asked. "I think you're someone who's had to be strong for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like when someone's willing to share the weight," Cameron said gently. Something hot and unwelcome pricked at the corners of Olivia's eyes. She turned away before he could see. "I don't need anyone to carry my weight," she said to the wall. "That's just it. You don't need it, but sometimes it's okay to want it anyway." Cameron's voice followed her retreat, warm and patient. Madison yawned then, her tiny mouth stretching wide, and for a moment, all tension dissolved. "When was the last time you slept?" Cameron asked. "Last night, for about 4 hours. Well, that's not sustainable, especially when you're trying to take care of someone else." For the first time in months, Olivia felt her defenses lower slightly. The presence of this stranger should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it felt like relief, like the first deep breath she'd taken since Madison was born. What she didn't know was that this man's presence would challenge everything she thought she knew about strength, independence, and what it meant to build a family. The conversation might have continued, but their moment was interrupted by the reality that Madison needed to sleep, and both adults were exhausted from the emotional intensity of their unexpected encounter. Their shared routine had begun to feel natural in ways that surprised them both. Cameron arrived each morning, taking over Madison's breakfast preparation while Olivia focused on getting ready for Sterling Technologies. The temporary arrangement had evolved into something more permanent without formal acknowledgement. Madison had blossomed under consistent care. The colicky infant had transformed into a curious baby who smiled readily and slept through the night. Their peaceful morning routine felt like a small miracle after months of chaos. But that tranquility was shattered by aggressive knocking at the front door that made both adults freeze in immediate recognition. Through the peephole, Olivia could see the same two men from before, but this time they weren't alone. A third man held official documents, while a fourth waited by the elevator with the bearing of private security. "This is serious escalation," Cameron said quietly, positioning himself between the door and Madison's high chair. "They're not here to negotiate anymore. Ms. Blackwood, we have legal documents requiring immediate attention," the smooth voice called through the door. "Asset seizure orders. Your late husband's debts have been assigned to our collection agency." The words hit like ice water. Richard had been dead for over a year. She'd thought his financial mess was resolved through probate. Cameron moved closer to the intercom. "Those documents need proper legal service, not intimidation in the morning." The response was heated conversation that wasn't quite audible. They hadn't expected someone who understood legal procedures. "This is your last chance," the lead man said finally. "We can do this easy or hard." Cameron's expression hardened into something that reminded Olivia of his police background. "Here's what's happening. You're stepping away from this door and pursuing this through proper channels. If you're still here in 60 seconds, I'm calling Seattle PD. You don't have authority here. I have the authority of someone who knows what legitimate law enforcement looks like," Cameron replied calmly. And this isn't it. The silence that followed was heavy with tension and recalculation. Finally, footsteps retreated down the hallway, followed by the elevator's soft chime. But the relief was short-lived. They'd be back with better tactics or actual legal backing. "They'll return," Olivia said aloud. "Probably," Cameron agreed. "But next time we'll be ready for them." Over the following days, their relationship shifted in subtle but significant ways. Cameron's presence became less temporary and more permanent, though neither explicitly acknowledged the transition. Olivia found herself working from home more often, partly to spend time with Madison, but also because Cameron's presence made the apartment feel safer. They developed evening routines that felt almost domestic, sharing dinner while Madison played nearby, taking turns with bath time and bedtime stories. The conversation that changed everything came one evening. Madison was asleep, and they were sharing wine to celebrate a successful product launch. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia said. "Why did you really leave police work?" Cameron was quiet for a long moment, staring into his wine glass. "Because I was good at saving other people's children, but I couldn't save my own." The admission was raw and painful. "After Sarah died, I thought I could handle everything. Work, Connor, all of it. I thought being strong meant not asking for help." "Connor's your son," Olivia said softly. "What happened?" "I had a breakdown at work. Started making mistakes, letting personal stuff interfere with professional judgment." The explanation painted a picture she recognized, the impossible balance of trying to be everything to everyone. "So Connor went to live with Sarah's parents," Cameron continued. "They could provide stability, consistent care, all the things he needed while I figured out how to be functional again. Do you regret it?" The question came out more vulnerable than intended. "I regret that it was necessary," Cameron said carefully. "I regret that I couldn't be the parent he needed right when he needed me most. But I don't regret making sure he had what he required to be happy and healthy, even if it meant stepping back from what I wanted." They talked late into the evening about responsibility, about the difference between strength and stubbornness, about making decisions when every option felt inadequate. The wine made them both more honest than they might have been otherwise. By the time they said goodnight, something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer just co-parenting out of convenience, but out of genuine partnership and mutual understanding. The alcohol had stripped away pretenses and allowed them to see each other clearly for the first time. The crisis that cemented their bond came on an ordinary day that started normally but ended with everything changed. Building security called. The debt collectors were back with legitimate documentation and a police escort. "They're demanding entry," the guard explained apologetically. "I have to let them up." Cameron's response was immediate and strategic. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 5 minutes," Olivia said, panic creeping into her voice. "Then we secure what matters most and keep Madison safe through whatever's about to happen." The next hour was controlled chaos as officials went through the apartment methodically, photographing artwork, jewelry, electronics, anything with significant resale value. Cameron's police background proved invaluable. He understood procedures, questioned anything outside normal bounds, and maintained detailed notes. Most importantly, he kept Madison calm in her nursery while strangers invaded their space, reading stories and playing quiet games that kept her oblivious to the adult drama. His competence during crisis was both reassuring and impressive. When the officials finally left, taking only a few pieces of Richard's jewelry and electronics, the apartment felt violated despite minor losses. But something significant had happened during those tense hours. Olivia had watched Cameron handle a major crisis with grace and skill. "How did you know to prepare for this?" she asked as they surveyed the aftermath. "Because I've been on the other side of these searches," he said. "I know what they look for and what they can legally take." The explanation revealed how much thought he'd put into understanding her situation. That evening, after Madison was asleep and the legal documents were filed away, they sat with celebratory wine. The violation felt manageable because they'd faced it together. "I have a confession," Olivia said, feeling loose and honest. "When I first found you in Madison's nursery, I thought you might be dangerous." Cameron laughed ruefully. "Given the circumstances, that was probably reasonable." "But you weren't a threat," she continued. "You were the opposite. You were safety." The word felt important, capturing something essential about what Cameron had brought to their lives. Madison wasn't the only one who needed that, she added quietly, surprised by her own vulnerability. "I know," he said simply, and those two words contained more understanding than longer explanations might have managed. When Cameron moved toward his jacket, Olivia realized with panic that he was leaving. The thought of being alone, knowing hostile strangers knew where she lived, knowing work crises were escalating, was suddenly unbearable. The few hours of competent partnership had shown her what life could look like with reliable support. "Cameron, wait!" The words stopped him mid-reach for his jacket. "I don't know what's going to happen with those men or whether they'll be back, but if you're willing, I'd like you to stay. Not just tonight." The request came out more vulnerable than intended, but also more honest. "This isn't just about hiring childcare anymore," he said carefully. "This is about bringing someone into your family structure. That requires trust that probably shouldn't be based on one evening." She understood his caution was wise, given how quickly their relationship had developed. "I know it's sudden," she acknowledged, "but in one night you've demonstrated more competence and genuine care than I've seen from anyone in months. And I'm beginning to realize that maybe strength actually looks like knowing when to ask for help." Cameron studied her face for a long moment, weighing factors she couldn't read. "All right," he said finally. "I'll stay." The decision seemed to surprise him as much as it relieved her. As the night settled around them, Olivia realized this choice would change everything about how she approached motherhood and relationships. Their shared life had evolved into something that felt both natural and extraordinary. Cameron had officially moved into the guest bedroom, though his presence felt like family rather than employment. Madison, now older, had begun pulling herself up to standing and babbling in ways that sounded almost like words. The debt collection crisis had resolved through legal maneuvering and Cameron's systematic documentation of harassment tactics that crossed legal boundaries. More than practical problems had been solved. They developed routines and relationships that felt like a genuine family foundation. Cameron and Olivia had learned to read each other's moods and needs with intuitive understanding that usually took years to develop. They shared responsibilities seamlessly. He handled Madison's morning routine while she managed bedtime. They alternated weekend duty when Madison was particularly demanding. The partnership they'd built around Madison's welfare had become the framework for something that looked very much like a chosen family. On this particular evening, the progression felt especially obvious. Cameron was assembling Madison's new bookshelf while she played with the packaging materials. Apparently, cardboard boxes were infinitely more interesting than expensive toys. Olivia worked at her laptop nearby, occasionally glancing up to watch Madison's determined efforts to climb into the largest box or to appreciate the competent way Cameron approached even simple household tasks. The scene was so domestic, so comfortable, that it took her a moment to recognize how far they'd traveled from that first tense midnight encounter. "She's going to be walking soon," Cameron observed, watching Madison use the coffee table to cruise from one end to the other with increasing confidence. "Dr. Martinez thinks maybe another month or two." Olivia felt a pang at the thought. Pride at Madison's development mixed with bittersweet awareness that each new skill meant growing independence. "Are you ready for that?" Cameron asked. And Olivia sensed deeper currents beneath the practical question about how their relationship might change as Madison's needs evolved. "I think I'm ready for anything as long as we're handling it together," Olivia said, the words coming out more direct than planned, but feeling true enough that she didn't want to take them back. Cameron's smile was warm and slightly surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to voice what they'd both been thinking. "Together sounds good to me," he said simply. Madison chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal and clap her hands, as if applauding their commitment to shared parenting. The evening continued in the peaceful rhythm they'd established over months of practice. Cameron finished the bookshelf while Olivia gave Madison her bath. Then they reversed roles for bedtime stories in the final bottle. By the time Madison was asleep in her crib, surrounded by stuffed animals and soft blankets, the apartment felt settled in the way that only came when everyone was exactly where they belonged. They found themselves back in the living room, sharing wine that had become their evening tradition. The conversation ranged over Madison's development, work challenges they were each facing, plans for the following week's schedules. But underneath the practical topics ran a current of deeper satisfaction, the quiet pleasure of people who'd built something good together and were enjoying the fruits of their collaboration. "Can I tell you something?" Olivia said as the wine and comfortable evening loosened her usual reserve. "I used to think successful parenting meant doing everything yourself, never needing help, proving you could handle any challenge independently." The admission felt important as she made it, acknowledging beliefs that had shaped her approach to everything but had proven inadequate when applied to raising Madison. "I thought asking for help was admitting failure, showing weakness." Cameron's expression was thoughtful and understanding. "What changed your mind?" he asked. "You did," Olivia said simply, "watching you with Madison, seeing how much better she was when she had consistent care from someone who knew what they were doing, realizing that my pride was less important than her well-being." She paused, swirling wine in her glass while formulating thoughts that felt risky to voice. "And then realizing that maybe I was better too, when I wasn't trying to handle everything alone." Cameron's response was characteristically thoughtful. "I think there's a difference between needing help because you can't manage alone and choosing to accept help because it makes life better for everyone involved." The distinction resonated with Olivia, capturing something essential about how their relationship had evolved, not from her inadequacy, but from mutual recognition that they worked well together. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "A choice rather than a necessity?" The question felt loaded with implications about the future, about whether their partnership would survive if circumstances changed. "I'd like to think so," Cameron said, his voice carrying careful honesty. "I'd like to think we're choosing to build something together because it's good, not just because it's convenient or necessary." The sentiment echoed Olivia's own hopes about what they'd created together, having value beyond its practical benefits. Madison's cry from the nursery interrupted the moment, but rather than feeling disruptive, it felt natural. Cameron was on his feet immediately, moving toward her room with automatic response, but Olivia was already following. They found Madison standing in her crib, not distressed, but simply awake and apparently interested in rejoining the adult company. "Hey, beautiful," Cameron said softly, reaching down to lift her out. Madison babbled in response, reaching for Olivia with casual expectation that suggested she'd never doubted both adults would be available when she needed them. "Maybe she just wanted to check that we were still here," Olivia suggested, taking Madison from Cameron and settling into the rocking chair. Madison curled against her with trustful relaxation that still felt like a minor miracle. Cameron sat on the ottoman facing them, close enough to participate in Madison's decision about whether she was ready to return to sleep. In the dim light of the nursery, with Madison peaceful between them and the city quiet beyond the windows, the moment felt complete in ways that Olivia hadn't known to hope for. "You know what I realized today?" Cameron said quietly, his voice pitched not to disturb Madison's drowsy contentment. "When I think about the future, when I try to picture what I want my life to look like, it looks a lot like this." The words were simple, but they carried weight that made Olivia's breath catch. "Evenings like this, routines like ours, being part of something that feels permanent, like something worth building around." The admission wasn't quite a declaration, but it was more than casual observation. "I've been thinking the same thing," she said quietly, matching his tone and careful honesty. Not just about Madison, though obviously she's the center of everything, but about us, about what we've built together, about whether this is something we're doing temporarily or something we're choosing for the long term. Cameron's smile was soft and certain in the dim nursery light. I think we've been choosing it for months, he said. I think we just haven't said it out loud yet. The observation felt true. They'd been making decisions and building routines that assumed a shared future without explicitly acknowledging that's what they were doing. Madison stirred slightly in Olivia's arms, and Cameron stood to help transfer her back to the crib. The process was seamless, practiced, the kind of coordinated care that had become second nature. Madison settled immediately, secure in her environment and confident that the adults who mattered would be nearby if she needed them. They stood together beside the crib for a moment, watching Madison sleep, with the mixed satisfaction and exhaustion that came with successful parenting. The silence felt comfortable, full of understanding rather than empty of words. When they finally moved toward the nursery door, Cameron's hand found Olivia's in a gesture that felt both natural and significant. In the hallway outside Madison's room, they paused, reluctant to break the connection the evening had established, but unsure how to move forward without disrupting the careful balance they'd maintained. Thank you, Olivia said finally, the words inadequate for everything she wanted to convey. For staying, for making this work, for being exactly what we needed, even when I didn't know what that was. Thank you for letting me stay, Cameron replied. For trusting me with Madison, with this, for making me feel like I belong somewhere again. The exchange felt like both a conclusion and a beginning, a recognition of what they'd accomplished together and an implicit commitment to continuing the journey they'd started. On an ordinary evening that felt extraordinary in its peaceful contentment, the transformation was complete. Cameron sat at the kitchen counter, washing the dinner dishes with the methodical thoroughness that characterized all his domestic tasks. Madison, now older and walking with a determined wobble of new mobility, played with measuring cups nearby, occasionally offering commentary and babbled syllables that sounded increasingly like actual words. Olivia worked at her laptop at the dining table, close enough to supervise Madison but absorbed in quarterly reports that required attention even on weekends. The scene was utterly ordinary, the kind of evening routine that millions of families navigated without thinking twice about it. But for Olivia, the ordinariness itself felt miraculous. The chaos and uncertainty that had defined Madison's early months seemed like distant memories, replaced by rhythms and relationships that felt both stable and sustainable. Coffee tomorrow morning? Cameron asked as he dried the last plate, the question part of their established ritual. I'll make it strong, Olivia replied without looking up, her response automatic after months of practice. Madison chose that moment to abandon her measuring cups in favor of attempting to climb onto Olivia's lap, a maneuver that required closing the laptop and accepting that work was finished for the evening. Story time, Cameron suggested, noting Madison's increasing restlessness and the hour that indicated bedtime was approaching. The transition to evening routine happened seamlessly, without discussion or negotiation. They'd learned each other's rhythms well enough that coordination rarely required explicit planning. The bedtime routine itself had evolved into something that felt almost ceremonial in its consistency. Cameron ran Madison's bath while Olivia selected books and prepared the evening bottle. They took turns with different aspects of the process, their movements coordinated by months of practice and mutual understanding. Madison participated with the cheerful cooperation of a child who knew exactly what to expect and found security in the reliability of familiar patterns. By evening, Madison was asleep in her crib, surrounded by stuffed animals and soft blankets that had accumulated over months of thoughtful gifts and practical necessities. The nursery felt peaceful in the dim glow of the nightlight, a space that had been transformed from a source of midnight anxiety into the heart of their shared domestic life. Cameron and Olivia stood beside the crib, confirming Madison's contentment before retreating to adult space and conversation. They moved to the living room, following patterns established over months of shared evenings. Olivia settled into her usual corner of the sofa, while Cameron gathered scattered toys, restoring order that would be thoroughly disrupted again tomorrow. The wine bottle that appeared was part of their tradition, marking the transition from parenting duties to adult time. The conversation was easy and comfortable, touching on Madison's development, work challenges, plans for the following week. As the evening progressed, they found themselves talking less and simply enjoying each other's company in the comfortable silence that had become one of the most valuable aspects of their partnership. Cameron read while Olivia worked on personal correspondence, both content to share space without feeling obligated to fill it with conversation. The city lights twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a backdrop that had become as familiar and comforting as the domestic routines they'd established inside the apartment. When they finally prepared to end the evening, the transition felt natural rather than forced. "Good night," Cameron said as they turned off lights and checked locks, following security routines that had become automatic. "Sleep well," Olivia replied, the words carrying warmth that went beyond polite convention. In the hallway outside their respective bedrooms, they paused for a moment that had become part of their evening ritual, a brief connection that acknowledged the day's shared experiences and confirmed their partnership would continue tomorrow. And in that silence, full of presence and understanding and the quiet satisfaction of a life well shared, there was everything that mattered most. Not promises of forever or declarations of eternal love, but the simple, profound truth that sometimes the most important things in life were the ones that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The stranger who had startled Olivia with his unexpected presence in Madison's nursery had become the foundation of a family built on choice, trust, and the daily decision to show up for each other in ways both small and significant. The story of Olivia, Cameron, and Madison offers a deeply moving lesson. True strength lies in choosing vulnerability and accepting help to build a life of shared purpose. Olivia, a billionaire single mother overwhelmed by the demands of parenthood and unresolved grief, learns through Cameron's quiet competence and empathy that independence doesn't mean isolation. His intuitive care for Madison and unwavering support during crises, like the debt collector's invasion, reveal that family is forged through trust and mutual reliance, not just blood or wealth. Cameron's own journey, marked by the loss of his wife and the painful choice to prioritize his son's stability, underscores that love often requires sacrifice and humility. Together, their transformation from strangers to a chosen family teaches us that letting go of pride to embrace partnership can heal wounds and create something enduring. This narrative resonates with anyone who's faced the fear of failing those they love, reminding us that asking for help is not weakness, but a courageous step toward connection. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever found strength in asking for help or built a family through unexpected bonds? Your stories inspire us all. If Olivia and Cameron's journey touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more tales of resilience and love. Let's keep celebrating the power of chosen families and the courage to trust. Subscribe now and be part of our mission to spread hope and connection.